And I'm going to be fairly modest here in the sense that I'm going to talk about the lessons that I've learned. So I'm not going to come up with rules or what other people should do. I'm just going to freely talk a high level overview of the lessons that I've learned. Let me just start off with what a year it's been. I'm not sure if anybody remembers their New Year's resolution at the beginning of 2020 and how little of that may have come to fruition. I had a big trip booked to Italy that didn't come through with the family. There was one good part though. I was able to watch some Netflix series, excellent one on leadership. For instance, The Last Dance with Michael Jordan, talking about his experience when he was leading the Bulls to 6 championships. And I was so inspired by that movie that I decided to buy myself a pair of Air Jordans. I always wanted those as kids. I finally have the money to buy them. And I got them thinking that I would look super cool. But in fact, of looking super cool, I was walking the dog the other day and my wife was telling me that you look so clunky with these shoes on. You actually look more like Frankenstein. And I was thinking, I was kind of upset by that. Not so much because I was called Frankenstein, but Frankenstein is not the monster. Victor Frankenstein was a scientist that was putting disjointed systems together to try to create artificial intelligence. And I thought, well, what an apt description for someone that works for a large legacy organization. And of course, you know, in engineering, we're not trying to create living creatures, but the decisions that we make with regards to artificial intelligence do affect lives. And what I want to talk to you about today is that they can actually impact and provide a power over life and death in certain instances. Just a little bit about my background. Anybody can reach out to me at LinkedIn if they want to message me. That's where I'm available. And just during the introduction, was made clear, my background is not in underwriting or insurance, actually, nor is my background in AI. So here I am giving a talk about AI and insurance, where my background is actually in aerospace engineering, and particularly on combustion. Most of my academic part of my research career, I spent on making things burn faster. So I was adding aluminum nanoparticles to solid rocket propellants to see if we can have those burn faster under stable conditions. And later I was adding silane to gaseous fuels to see if we can accomplish supersonic combustion in scramjets. And in my professional research career as a research scientist for FM Global, I went the other way, and I had to look and see if I could make things burn slower. And right here you see a little video of one of my claims to fame, which was to find protection, fire protection for distilled spirits, or whiskey in this case. And what a better and noble cause than making sure that single malt whiskey is well protected within the next 15 to 20 years. But in any case, what we want to talk to you about today is about AI, right? And I want to start with what the AI expectations are. And then through the remainder of the talk, I'm going to talk about what that means for commercial property risk insurance. So where I would like to start is with the hype cycle. Everybody's probably familiar with the hype cycle. It's been reported by Gartner. It really starts with an innovation trigger, some kind of technology. People get very excited about that until it reaches some peak of inflated expectations. I'm part of an innovation team now, so I see all these inflated technologies come towards me. And then people figure out that it can't quite do what they were hoping it could do. And then it slides down into this trough of disillusionment, only to then eventually gain some popularity back and end up on a plateau of productivity. And I love this hype cycle because it's really a good mental model to think about all these technologies that go. And because anything that's happening in AI is moving so fast, you can just put these hype cycles year to year next to each other and see each of these technology move on it. So if I look at Gartner's 2020 presentation of the hype cycle regarding AI, and I just select a few items there, you can really see that the GPUs are well within the plateau of productivity. And we all know this, they're being used quite ubiquitously. Interestingly, according to Gartner, deep learning, machine learning chatbots are kind of on their way down, and autonomous cars, and I got to assume that this level 4 autonomous cars are really deep in the trough of disillusionment right now. I think we're just realizing that we're a little bit further away from fully autonomous door-to-door cars than maybe we were thinking 5-6 years ago. But I'm very interested on the left side of the graph where we see things on the rise like smart robots, decision intelligence, and augmented intelligence and small data. And these are the parts of AI that are very important for us as a large commercial property risk insurer. For instance, augmented intelligence is an alternative conceptualization of artificial intelligence that focuses on AI's assistive role and is really emphasizing the fact that cognitive technology is designed to enhance human intelligence rather than replace it. And that's so important when you're in a complex business environment. And related to that is decision intelligence, right? Where we're not just looking at data science, but we're combining it with decision theory and managerial science into a framework that allows us to make the best business decisions. And also small data. We don't have a million pictures of dogs and cats, right? And most problems that we see in our business sense, they don't present themselves as a dog-cat kind of problem. So we have to come up with ways that with less data, we can still create and provide intelligent decision-making. So that leads me to one interesting book that I read by Kareem Lakhani and Marco Ianciti, Competing in the Age of AI. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. But the main takeaway for me from reading this book was that we're competing, and as the title said, we're competing in the age of AI. So my first lesson was that businesses are becoming increasingly part of an AI-driven world. So it's not so much you asking yourself all the time, what can AI do for me and my organization? And can I replace Tina, the admin, with a chat bot? And how much man hours does that save me? It's really thinking about it in a much broader sense, right? So questions like, how does AI impact your supplier and the supply chain? Or how does AI impact the competitors? Or how does AI impact the clients and the consumer behavior in general? All these things need to be taken into account because we're living in a highly connected world. And it's not just about us and what happens within our four walls. Now, today I'm going to be talking about the insurance business model. I'm going to talk about AI in insurance a little bit at a very high level. But what I really want to start with is presenting the insurance business model and translating that in type of objective functions that we can work with when we're dealing with AI. And I'm going to keep it very simple and use very little equations during this talk, so don't worry. So I want to just do a thought experiment. Just imagine that we are working for an insurance company, right? And let's just pick something that we're very intuitively familiar with, something like car insurance, which is great. Because for us as an insurance company, which we imagine we are at this point, car insurance is mandatory. So what's better business model than to sell something that's mandatory for anybody that drives a car? So right now we have all this premium coming in from all these car insurance policies. So right now the business model looks pretty good, right? We got money going in. Unfortunately, some of the drivers are not that great. And some of them are great, but just hit a patch of black ice, right? You can't always predict who the good and the bad drivers are. But in any case, some of these cars are going to occur losses. So that's money out of our company. And there's another way that money is being spent, and then there's the expenses of running the operations, right? So you're going to have to adjust these losses. You're going to have the financial management of distributing who gets what. You're going to have to spend money in marketing and all these running the businesses and renting the office space and so forth. So here you have it. This is the business model for any insurance company. And this is about the thing that insurance companies have in common, because as you will notice later on, saying that you work for an insurance company doesn't mean a whole lot. It's like saying that you work for a transportation company. That could mean you work for SpaceX, or that could mean you are an Uber driver or anything in between. Right? But the general business model for any insurance company is based on this. So how would you turn this into an objective function or one metrics that you can measure how successful you are as an insurance company? Well, it's actually very simple. You just take your expenses and your losses and you put that in the numerator, and you take your premium and you put that in the denominator. And since this is a business stock, this will be the only equation I'll be using, but this is what we refer to as the combined ratio as an insurance company. And it's a really easy way to evaluate the performance, because if the number is less than 1, that means you're running a profit and you're doing well. If the number gets above 1, that means that you're actually having more losses and more expenses than you're bringing in premium, and that's not so good. So the question is, we have 3 levers here that we can play around with if we want to do well as a company, right? We can reduce the expenses, and you can see this happening with some insurance companies like Lemonade, where they try to fully automate some of the processes and take as many people out of the loop as possible, and really keep those expenses as low as possible. You could raise your premium. That's one way to bring in more money and bring the combined ratio down. The problem is that you're very hand-tied to market condition, and it's a very inelastic feature here in the fact that if you raise your prices, you're going to price yourself out of the market very quickly. The third and final lever that we can pull on is to reduce losses, right? So we can reduce loss for our clients. So we can just take on clients that are less prone to losses, or we can, once we have the client, we can make sure through engineering and whatnot, and I'll talk about that in a second, how to reduce those losses. So a good way to think about it is another book, Predicting Machines, is really an economics way of looking at this. So A.V. Goldfarb, A.J. Agrawal, and Joshua Gans, all working at the University of Toronto, really take an economist view of AI. And one quote from A.J. in particular I liked is that the rise of AI can be seen as a drop in the cost of prediction. So if you look at those 3 levers that I just talked about, where the AI comes in from an insurance company, is really thinking about how can it help us make better predictions? How can it make us better predictions about whether a driver is going to have an accident? How is it going to make us better prediction about future market condition, et cetera? Okay, so it's really an economic rule. So we can really apply that to our basic mental model and the combined ratio here, and just translate everything into how AI can help. So how can AI help us reduce expenses? How can AI help us get more premium? How can AI reduce claims or pay them out faster? So these are very interesting questions from the insurance industry. And I don't think that, since I just mentioned the insurance industry is so diverse, there's no single answer. But of course, McKinsey in 2018 did make an attempt to state that what they thought by 2030 would be the main influences of AI on the insurance vertical. And they basically put it in 3 buckets. One is the distribution. So how is insurance sold, and how is the interaction with the client taking place? The next one is pricing. So can you by the use of AI, very accurately price the risk? And some call that underwriting with a scalpel. And obviously the consequences of that is that the margins are going to get razor thin at some point. At some point, you're going to squeeze all the efficiency out of that with smarter and smarter algorithms. And finally, it's AI used in claims, where in the case of Lemonade, they pay out their claims in 3 seconds, which is great. So this is all great if you insure renter's insurance, if you insure a car or somebody's bicycle. But that's not what FM Global does. FM Global is a monoline, large commercial property risk insurer. So how does everything that I just said apply to one of the most prestigious technical institutes like MIT? What if you insure MIT? How does any of this apply, right? Or what if you insure a place where they don't have engineers, but Imagineers, right? And their building are not like anything else you see in the world. How do you price their risk, right? How you evaluate that? How are you going to apply AI to that? Or how are we going to deal with the fact that warehouses are now full of robots and they're bigger and taller than ever seen? How are we going to apply the protection that we've developed for the past few decades in terms of fire protection? Okay, so this doesn't really is something where AI can easily be applied. Which brings me to FM Global, the company I work for, a large commercial property insurer. And we basically live on one motto for nearly 200 years, and that is the majority of losses are preventable. The majority of loss is preventable, which really means that we apply engineering services to our clients, right? We don't use any actuarial science. And I'm not showing this, of course I want to brag about the company I work for, but I want to have this as a full understanding of why the applications of AI would be harder for us than it would be for some other insurance companies that do car insurance, for instance. But we make our engineering recommendation based on hard science and proprietary data, and not on actuarial formulas, right? And we have the scientists, over 200 scientists working for a company, and over 1,900 engineers all over the world assessing risk. So this leads to client partnership. We're a mutual company, so we don't have third-party shareholders. We're owned by our policyholders, so they're part of the decision-making. And we really have that partnership where we do business risk consulting. We have a global delivery, so we can follow our client all over the world. Because we're monoline, we only do property risk insurance. We really keep that specialty focus. And because we're owned by our policyholders, we have a very fair claims and fast claims payout procedure. Okay, so that's about FM Global, how we're unique. The main thing you want to remember from this is that we only do large commercial property risk. We insure about 1 out of 3 of the Fortune 1000. And for each of these clients, we have an individual risk assessment that we do, all with the philosophy in mind that the majority of losses is preventable. And what that really means for our clients, that resilience is a choice, right? And we can talk later about where AI comes in, but it really starts with the fact that resilience is a choice. So resilience is a choice used to be defined just by how fast you could overcome obstacles that the world would throw at you. But one would argue that now the complexities in the businesses you run and the industries you operate and the world you live in are redefining resilience. They're making the job more uncertain and more demanding. So being resilient is going to take much more effort now, but it's also going to pay off, in our opinion, because it provides that competitive advantage. If you're the only one that's standing after a major flood or a major storm, then you're going to have a major competitive advantage and you can gain market. If you are a chemical plant, you do not want to make the news because there's some green cloud passing over a school that comes because your factory is on fire, right? That is your brand that's on the line. So FM Global will replace that factory, but if we didn't apply sound engineering, you would still be at risk of losing that brand and that reputation. So I want to bring it back a little bit towards AI again, and the difference between business to consumer and business to business, and really looking at it from a data perspective. Okay, so business to consumer, just imagine the car insurer that I talked about, and the business to business, imagine FM Global insuring MIT or Disney. What is the difference in data? Well, you can look at the complexity of the data. So if you think about insuring a car, how much about a car do you need to know? Maybe 20 features, 25 features or so. How much data do you have? The ubiquity of the data. Well, if you're a car insurer, it's not uncommon to insure 10 million or so and have 10 million policies just in the United States alone. So plenty ubiquity of data, plenty of data available. Whereas for FM Global, we only have a few thousand clients. And each client, like a research campus or a large university, can only be described by thousands and thousands of features, right? So very complex data and small data. And we can actually come up and put that in a ratio, on which I call the AI opportunity ratio, which I have the ubiquity of the data divided by the complexity of the data. And just to put that into a thought experiment, let's get back to our car insurance example. And if you have a large car insurance, maybe with 10 million policies, and each policy is pretty well described by 25 features or so, you divide 1 by the hour, you're going to have an AI opportunity ratio on the order of 10 to the 5th. For FM Global, we have a few thousand clients. Each of these clients can literally be described by thousands of features. So our AI opportunity ratio from a data and consumer and client perspective is more around unity, right? And since we do some dimension reduction here, and we can put it in a quadrant, and we can put it and plot that against other features like digital nativeness. And this is an interesting quadrant here, because when you work for a complex, well-established organization, and you listen to a lot of the consultants, business consultants, and you read articles, they're constantly touting about people that are the leaders in AI and the champions of AI. And similar names come up, and I think we're all familiar with them, right? And it's just good for us to recognize where in this quadrant these companies sit, right? So is it really fair if a business a business consultant comes to me and say, well, why aren't you more like Amazon, right? Or why aren't you more like Ant Financial or Uber? We're running a completely different business, and our thinking needs to be completely different as well. Lemonade is interesting here, super digitally native, right? Only founded a few years ago. Really, everything is automated. And now that they're building more and more customers, they're actually on their way up in the AI opportunity ratio, because now they have more clients, more policyholders, and more data to apply their AI on. So similarly, and again, getting back to Competing in the Age of AI by Kareem Lakhani and Marco Lancidi, they come up with, Ian City, they came up with a similar metric, and that's really the value that you can generate versus the number of users. So for a traditional operating model, you can generate good value even if you have limited number of users. But then if you have a digital operating model, which in this case is another way of saying of being able to apply AI for your business, it really goes up exponentially after a certain point of the number of users. So if you work for a business-to-business company, or you have a limited set of clients, you may really want to ask yourself, where am I on this graph, and where can I really leverage it? And it's really about becoming knowledgeable. So that's where my lesson 2 comes from that I learned. So become knowledgeable about what AI solutions exist today, how to evaluate them, and which ones are expected to exist tomorrow. So don't just rely on what other people tell you. Have people become experts in your own company, because most of the field is only 3, 4, 5 years old. And the experts that existed 10 years ago are no longer experts unless they keep learning. And every organization should have people, in my opinion, that keep learning about these things. Here's another thing. Focus on the I in AI. What is the intelligence? What makes your business unique? Right? And in our case in FM Global, it's this engineering and science-based loss prevention. And don't lose that. You don't want to replace that with AI. You want to keep that. But if you use AI, you want to enhance it. And I just want to spend a few minutes with a thought experiment, just to as an example of the importance of just intuitive understanding, expertise, and having knowledge about loss prevention. So this is actually 2 pictures from inside FM Global's large fire technology lab. So this was a job that I had prior to joining the innovation team. And forgive me for using fire examples, but that is my background. But similar thinking is going to apply to natural hazards and flood and wind and so forth. But let's just assume that we were tasked as a fire protection engineer to tell the client what type of sprinklers they need to install. So on the left here, there is 50-foot high storage of expanded plastic. So these are the type of things that you see in meat trays, in cool boxes, and the kind of foam and expanded plastic. On the right, you see hard plastic pallets. So this is unexpanded. So both the materials are the same, right? So you got meat trays here, solid plastic here. It's both polyethylene. So on a molecular level, it's very much the same. It's just a physical configuration that's different. So it's in a foam form here, and it's in a solid form here, as you can see right here in a close-up. Now I want you to imagine doing the following. I want you to go to the screen and grab this foam ball, and then grab the solid plastic in each hand. So you get the foam ball in your left hand, the solid plastic in your right hand. And I just want you to think about which hand is going to feel warmer. Is it going to be the left hand with the styrofoam, or is it going to be the right hand with the solid plastic? And I think we can all agree that it's going to be the left hand is going to feel warmer, right? And it's not because the styrofoam generates heat. It's the heat from your hand not being able to penetrate into it because it works so well as an insulator, right? You can just imagine if you hold a metal bar, all the heat from your hand gets diffused into the material so effectively that it feels very cold. So what can you do with that information? Well, if the surface of the styrofoam heats up very easily because it's very isolated, if there's a flame impinging on it, it means that the surface is going to heat up very fast. Well, if the surface is going to heat up very fast, if it heats up beyond a certain point, it's going to off-gas flammable gas in the process that's called pyrolysis. So in the styrofoam case, that's going to happen very, very fast because the surface is going to heat up very, very fast. So what you would expect from the styrofoam, from the expanded plastic, is very fast fire growth. And in fact, if we subject both of these setups to a fire test, and this is 1 minute in, you can see that the styrofoam and the expanded plastic, the fire has already reached close to 30 feet. Where here in the unexpanded plastic, the fire hasn't grown at all. Okay, and that's purely derived from the knowledge that one hand is feeling warmer than the other. So what kind of sprinkler do we need? We want to know what kind of sprinkler we need, right? So we got very fast fire growth. So we need to get a sprinkler that responds very, very quickly. So that means that we need a sprinkler that has a very tiny link that heats up very quickly, so it activates very quickly. Also, we know we need a sprinkler that is a low temperature rating, so it already activates at a low temperature. So it really gets water to that fire quick, because you don't want this fire to grow any bigger, because it's really going to grow fast. So what else do we know? Just from the fact that that hand felt warm, right? This is just, there's no math here, nothing. It's just derived from the fact that one material feels warmer in the hand than the other. Well, if the fire grows very fast, it's going to have a very violent plume. That fire is going to have a very violent plume. It's going to go up very, very fast. So what does that mean about the sprinkler? It needs to have very big droplets, because if the droplets are very small, it's not going to be able to penetrate the plume and reach the fire. It's just going to blow away. So how do we get big droplets coming out of sprinkler? Well, we need to make sure that the pressure doesn't get too high, because if you get the pressure too high, you're going to atomize and you're going to really get this fine mist, which we don't need, because we're going to want to get that water onto the fire. The other part is, this is going to be a big fire. So how do we get a lot of water onto this fire? Well, we're going to need a sprinkler with a large orifice size, a large hole, because we want to have low pressure, but we still want to get a lot of water. We better have a sprinkler with a large orifice. So there you have it. Just from feeling the material and feeling that it feels warm in your hands, I was able to derive that we're probably going to need a large sprinkler that's quick response with a 165 low temperature rating at moderate to low pressures. And lo and behold, if you go to the NFPA standards, or if you go to the FM Global standards, you're going to find that recommended for this setting is a sprinkler of that type. So I didn't use any AI, I didn't use any math, I didn't use any equations. This is purely understanding the problem. Now just imagine if you wanted to do that with AI and you want to make a prediction with AI, how would you formalize that knowledge, right? How many tests would you have to need, comparing it to dogs and cats? But now imagine fires that grow fast and fires that don't grow fast. How much training data would you need to say anything sensible like that? That's my whole point. Don't forget about the I and AI. Don't forget about the things that you're good at and your intuitive thinking. We can apply the same thing to a roll paper fire. Paper feels kind of warm too, especially if it's layered. And this is literally from the point of ignition. This is 40 feet high under a 60-foot ceiling. And the fire reaches the ceiling only within 20 seconds, right? This is the kind of test that we can do. So how do we use AI here? Right? How can we use AI here to tell us anything that makes sense about how to protect these buildings? So focus on the I and AI. How can artificial intelligence enhance your strength? And it brings me to another book by Thomas Malone, Superminds. So Superminds are groups or individuals acting together in a way that seems intelligence. And so Malone's quote here is, we are thinking too much about people or computers and not enough about people and computers. And that's going to be my point here. You have this really domain expertise as an organization. You're not going to replace that domain expertise with AI. You got to think about, how can you interact? What problems can you solve with AI in between, and connect that to the people that have that domain expertise? So if you have a classical organizational structure, that structure might stay in place, that's fine, but you're going to have to find a way how to seamlessly integrate that with the machines and with the computers, right? So every data and every piece of information is now freely accessible. Because if you can do that, now you can plug in other pieces. You can have cloud-based data, or you can have people's cell phone data. And if you can all interact with that, you can really create one big Supermind. And just my lesson 4 is literally a quote.
Jeff, sorry to interrupt you. We have only a couple of seconds. Can you please wrap it up for the next session? We have to start.
Are we out of time? I'm almost done. I'm 2 slides in.
Only 1 minute. You have only 1 minute, please.
Okay, 1 minute. Okay. So that's my 4th lesson, to think about people and computers can be connected so that collectively they act more intelligently than a person in a group. And then finally, Bill quotes about the information at your fingertips. What do you need to do if those fingertips are no longer human, but if it's a machine fingertip? That gets me to lesson 5, which say that when you implement AI and a data strategy, think like a machine rather than forcing a machine to think like a human, because it's a much more effective way to make use of that data and your AI strategy. So that's really it. And sorry, I think I used all my time. Just want to remind everybody that not every transformation needs to be digital, as my son shows here with his Halloween costume that he's going to use next week. And with that, I would just like to say